Hey guys, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to talk today about outdated security costs lives. My name is Tim Albright, your host. Before we bring our fantastic guest on, a couple housekeeping notes. First and foremost, we do have a chat section. This is a great way for you guys to converse with each other, converse with us, have a conversation. We do have a Q&A section, so put your questions there. Our folks will get us those questions and we'll answer those periodically throughout the area. And finally, we have a poll section, and this is where we will be putting up questions throughout the webinar, throughout the event, and just asking your opinion on certain things. All right, to get going, first and foremost, my buddy Michael Peevler from Atlas IED is joining us. Welcome, sir.
Hey, buddy. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. And also with us is Cameron Javdani from Atlas IED. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for having me.
So I got to see both of you gentlemen at ISC West last week in Las Vegas, and to say that Atlas made a splash at that show, I think would be a slight understatement. I was there on Wednesday, and I was by the booth a couple of different times, and you guys were packed each and every time that I was there. And the main reason for that is your new AIX system. We'll talk about that in a second, but first, and Michael, we'll start with you on this. When we talk about school security in general, right? Here in the States, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue globally, but the United States has some unique challenges to around school security. So when we talk about it, what is the biggest issue with school security today?
I think it's the ever changing threat range
Okay.
today, right? I mean, clearly school shootings have been an issue. Most of us remember Columbine, and it hasn't slowed down since. And I think there's a numbing to it to some degree. You hear about a school shooting of one or two people, and it's an afterthought almost in the news. It doesn't lead the headline. It's just become commonplace, sadly. But the threat level has changed. Right now, we've had stabbings, we've had attacks multiple other ways. If you turn on social media, you see teachers being attacked by students, which creates all kinds of dangerous situations. So I think the ever changing risk um, is probably the single biggest issue. And one B would be the schools not really knowing how to best manage those threats, um, because they don't know who to talk to. I've had superintendents tell me, do I work with the local police? Do I work with one of 20 consultants calling me every week? Do I, like, who is actually going to be the person that helps me solve this? Because I want to take care of my students and staff. But those people they're educators. They're not security professionals. And I think those are two of the biggest challenges in this space today.
Well, Cameron, that is the one of the crux of the issues, right? Is that you have administrators from the superintendent down to the school's principal and certainly the educators themselves. Their number one job is to educate, right? But they're also in charge of the lives of these children. So, to Michael's point, who do I lean on and who do I trust to get a system better? So when you're looking at it, what is some of the biggest issues with school safety today?
For me, it comes down to the question of how are these threats being detected and communicated in the first place? To Michael's point of the ever-changing risk profiles of the security challenges that schools are facing, they need a program, a policy, a technology in place that can detect those, and that can be coordination with law enforcement. It could be coordination with social media platforms, and then once those risks, those threats are found, how are you communicating it so the people who know and who can respond are aware of it and can respond effectively in a preventative way? Um, Anyone can see something happen on a camera and then respond after the fact. After the fact is obviously too late. So, in looking at ways that these schools can respond in a defensive manner or a proactive manner to ultimately keep kids safe and keep staff safe during the school day, that's where we want to see things develop to.
It has been said to me by a number of security professionals and integrators in this space that camera systems are great because it allows you to do a post analysis, right? You can see what happened in the past tense. it feels like that we're looking for something that is a little bit more current tense
Yeah.
in this, right? And Michael, how does I mean how does AIX address that current tense? Like what is happening in the moment?
Yeah. So we've all seen the evolution um, of camera technology with AI technology to be able to proactively identify things, right? People, cars, and in some cases, weapons, right? There's several brands out there that just specifically just focus on that weapon piece, and then they use a third party for a very quick confirmation that that is in fact a weapon. It's not a somebody carrying a tripod across a parking lot. It's actually a weapon, and then they can proactively act. I mean, that is the concept, um, and it's become a more active piece with AIX, which is our new addition to the IPX platform, which is a product we've done very well with, and has really just been focused on the mass communication side. Right, when an event happens, how do we get that message to everyone really rapidly? With AIX, we've added a modular component, and one of those components, really two of those components, are focused on both AI camera detection of a weapon. So the second someone pulls a weapon out, the idea is to be able to visually identify that. And then there's also a gunshot detection component should they get the weapon off, um, uh, to be able to get that confirmation very quickly. And there's a whole story kind of behind the gunshot technology, the gunshot detection technology. But really, it's incorporating that technology by running AI on the board to be able to build and process that information very quickly and then communicate that. And the option of that third party analysis and all that will be there as well.
Cameron, once the system says yes, this is a gun and or a gunshot, how does the system then connect with and communicate? Again, we talked about in real time with other systems that allows for a shutdown, allows for a lockdown, allows for notification.
Yeah, ultimately, like Michael said, it's enabled for a third-party verification system, so we know that we're not locking down a facility based on a false positive, right?
Okay.
And as good as any system is, you always want to have that verification step because having a false alarm that ultimately, say you call the SWAT team in for when there's nothing going on, that's something we all want to avoid, right? So we have that third-party verification step. At that point, we can communicate throughout the facility that there is a threat and appropriate action needs to be taken. What that action is can depend on the nature of the threat and the procedure that the facility has in place. So if they need to lock down a facility, that action can be taken. It can be communicated in a number of different ways. We like to use the term multimodal. So we have a screen message that plays in terms of a visual indication. We have a what's described as intrusive announcement or intrusive audio, meaning that let's say you're around a campus and how many times have you seen people walking around with their earbuds in and a hat or a hoodie over their head, they're minding their own business going about their day. We need to be able to reach those people. So having a audible announcement that can pierce whatever's going through their earbuds is important. And then ultimately we have flashing strobe indicators. So by one way or another, the intention is to get their attention and let them know that some action needs to be taken to keep them safe. If it's evacuate, we can tell them which way to evacuate. If it's a lockdown, we can tell them to shelter in place and what action to take to drive that safe outcome.
Those visual cues, both the system has an LCD screen, an LED screen, as well as those flashers. Is that in case they have their headphones up so loud? Because I was young once too, and I absolutely wore my headphones too loud. Is that to get beyond those headphones that are just drowning out everything else?
Yeah, it's one of many ways or one of many reasons. It could also be for reasons of accessibility. Some people might just not have hearing, and we
Yeah.
need to reach those people, right? And so by combining the visual indicators and the audible indicators, we're able to make sure that people are alerted to an emergency and know what to do. It would be a horrible outcome if we just had a sign that went up and people said, oh, yeah, I was reading my book in class, right? I didn't see it. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing during class. We want to be sure we can reach you nonetheless. So by having the multimodal notifications and being able to be sure that we can reach people in a noisy environment, in a crowded environment, it doesn't matter. These systems are designed to disrupt what you're doing because whatever emergency you're now facing is a higher priority than what you were doing before.
That's fair. Michael, you said something there that I want to pick on there, and that is you guys are running AI on the board. That to me means edge AI. Why is that important? Why is including AI on the actual components basically
Yeah.
for this system?
Well, because we need real-time information and we need it more quickly. There are overflow options that can centralize. We partner and work very closely with a company called Intellicy that does weapon detection, does fall detection, does a whole lot more than just weapons. And so we can run all existing cameras and the cameras that are in AIX back to Intellicy as a means to be able to handle greater processing power if we need to. But with the gunshot detection, it's actually running against a database that is stored on the board and can be updated along the way through the chip that's stored or the memory that's there. So we can upgrade that as we go through. So the way we built the gunshot detection system, as an example, is we actually spent time with a group of engineers with a gun catch that we custom made, or bullet catch that we custom made. We have a former SWAT team member named Jesus Villahermosa. Jesus does a lot of teaching and instruction for us. He's an amazing man. He responded to a shooting at his son's own school, which is just, I don't even know how you drive. He describes it as one of the most terrifying moments in his life, right? But he is a data freak and works with Homeland Security and a bunch of people. So he gave us a list of every weapon used in a mass shooting.
Wow.
And so we took every one of those weapons and went into a school with police officers, at time with kids, right? Very carefully, very supervised. And we fired into this bullet catch. And it was a custom made bullet catch because as audio guys, the guys figured out that it was cutting out some of the frequency of the more common bullet catches. So we made a customized version. So we have a database, essentially an AI database of every one of those shots in hallways and auditoriums and cafeterias with different weapons from different angles. When they spent the better part of a week plus in the school doing this. Again, under supervision with police officers, very careful, but we wanted to build it on a real database, right? We even did the typical drop books in the hall, knock over stuff, did all the things to try to make sure we had signatures of false positives, right? Our goal is to as create as realistic of an option as possible, and to do that, we've got to be able to do that processing on the edge as much as possible.
Tim, I'll add to that
Yeah.
too. Atlas ID is a global company, and we've worked with a number of customers that might be in markets that just don't have the infrastructure for cloud, or they might not have the reliability for cloud. So by having the technology on the edge, we're making sure that we can reach all of those customers as well in environments where maybe there's a higher security risk than others. But we wanted to be sure that we could reach everyone with this solution and not just ones with the high-speed capability for immediate cloud access.
Michael,
I want to point out real quick, sorry, I just want to add one thing to what Cameron said a second ago, and that is what happens when a weapon is detected and we get confirmation that it really is. Not only do we communicate over our system, but we are part of the security ecosystem. So we can trigger access locks, we can trigger other systems to play the role that they're designed to play. As we go into facilities, they quite often have already made investments in certain aspects of their security structure. There's no reason to get rid of that, particularly with school funding and security funding. It's in a more precarious situation today than it's ever been, right? Because and I don't want to be political, but with all the stuff with the Department of Education and with the lack of a real federal fund, there's a couple of grants today, but there's not an outstanding federal fund today funding school security as we've had in the past. And so schools are being really cautious about how they add. So we have to take advantage and use the infrastructure, right? I mean, even if they've got analog speakers in the hallway, great, we'll put a gateway on it, make it an IP zone, right? And you can use the existing infrastructure. So we're going to talk to the systems they have in place to create a full event and do everything as guided by the people in charge of security, to make sure that we create as safe as an environment as possible that's also friendly to first responders, that kind of thing.
That actually is a really good point because there is no, because with some systems some folks will come in and go, okay, well, all of this analog stuff has to get, out, and we in the industry we call it rip and replace, right? You're going to rip out this stuff and you're going to replace it with this stuff. That the ability to augment an existing analog system is actually quite important because to your point, you can, say that you've got an analog zone or you have several analog zones, you can make those part of your new system.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can, by doing that, we give the customer the ability to expand because if you think we all went to school, right? So we all heard announcements, but did you ever hear announcements outside the school? On a practice field, if you were a band kid, on a practice field, if you were an athlete? No, right? A stadium? No, right? But if there's an event, we need to hear that everywhere. We don't need to hear morning announcements out there, but we need parking lots. If it's a higher education facility, there's way more parking lots, open areas, walkways, all that kind of stuff. So by using existing infrastructure, we can move some of that investment to expanding the reach of the solution to make sure that when parents are dropping off kids at school, if there's an event going on, there's an announcement so that as soon as they start to get out of the car, they go, nope, back in the car. Because if it's in the early moments of an event, there aren't going to be sirens and craziness going off yet, right? So, and unfortunately, we have a documented history of both parents dropping off kids during active events and teachers bringing PE classes back into the building unaware of an active event. So we got to make sure that we cover all of those spaces to make sure that those people are as safe as possible as well.
Cameron, something Michael talked about there was the way that you guys collected the gunshot detection systems, and in the world of research that is usually referred to as first level data collection, right? You're not relying on somebody else's infrastructure, you're not relying on somebody else's collection. Why is that? Why was that important to Atlas for this
Sure.
system?
It's a good question, and my experience with gunshot detection technologies goes back about 10 years. Um, there were times when we would demo a gunshot detection solution, and someone wanted to test it, right? And so they would look up a YouTube video of a gunshot and play that file off of their cell phone, and nothing would happen in the gunshot detector. Uh, Forgive me for getting a little audio techie here for a moment. A gunshot is a loud explosion at all frequencies of an audio spectrum, all right? So when someone takes their phone, their speaker on their phone is not reproducing the audio at all those spectrums that the detector would be looking for. So when we developed our own data and collected our own recordings of it, we wanted to be sure that any issues with what mic was used to record a gunshot, what was the environment, what speaker reproduction was used, and all the bits of granular data that a model would look for accuracy, we wanted to be sure we had all of that information in our own collection of these recordings, right? So that when a real world event would happen, our model was trained on that. Question that comes up all the time is, how does a mic or how does an audio sensor account for things like echo and reflection off walls and reverberation and distortion? When you think of speech in a gymnasium, you hear all that sound bouncing around, and what happens is the sound you're trying to hear becomes a lot less intelligible. So if you have less clarity and more noise or distraction going on, how can we be sure the model works? Well, we trained it to work in that environment by getting those first level recordings. So looking at hallways, looking at gymnasiums, auditoriums where sound behaves differently, those are the environments that we train this model in. So To answer your question very directly of why it's important, it's because we want it to work accurately in those situations, in those environments. And by getting our own data, we made sure it would.
Well, in schools, I mean, it's been a minute since I was in a high school, but a school system has a unique set of, let's call it sounds. And I think Michael talked about, school, books dropping, you have lockers clanging, you have all sorts of other sounds that are not in a normal corporate environment. Let's put it that way, right?
Yeah.
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm agreeing with that. Absolutely.
And Tim, think what happens every 50 minutes or so is the hallways get really noisy for a few minutes during a passing period, and then they get really quiet again. Well, what happens if we need to make an announcement during one of those passing periods? The new AIX system has something called ambient noise compensation, which just means in a louder environment, the device picks up on that environment and then broadcasts a message at a level to be heard above that higher noise environment. And then when it's quiet, it knows it's quiet, so it doesn't have to play that announcement that deafens people. It can drop that output level down a little bit. So these are all scenarios and circumstances that have been thought of in the new AIX system.
I'll just add really quick on the gunshot detection. We not only have a microphone for high SPL and low SPL to get audio geeky so we can hear the full range, but we also have the ability to capture the IR flash or identify the IR flash of a weapon. So again, we're looking at multiple ways to narrow down the ability to have a false positive, right? We're trying to eliminate that as much as we can. And then building something like ambient noise compensation into the product really does, it not only is a convenience factor in an emergency because we know the data because Jesus has taught it to us, and that is most of these shootings happen before school, after school, lunch, or passing period.
Okay.
And so, and the interesting thing is all of our kids go through drills of starting sitting in class. And that's not very real world, right? And so we've had to try to build a system that will account for the real world environment of which it's going to be in. And if it's in the hallways, we're going to pick that volume up so they can hear. But that also is it eliminates the inconvenience of morning announcements being blaring in one room and they can barely hear it in the other. That ambient noise compensation is going to be used not only in that emergency, but in everyday communications. So the teacher doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, this thing's deafening me every day. No, it's going to adjust exactly like it. And we have a self-test feature built into the product, so we can literally test that as frequently as the customer or the integrator that installed it wants to make sure everything's working like it's supposed to. Because we've all walked into rooms, stood under speaker, and gone, there's nothing coming out of that. And they go, yeah, there hasn't been for 5 years. We just forget about it. And
Or I unplugged it because it was too loud.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So the ear adjusts, and it's kind of like the people that break into my car when I have the music up too loud before I get out of the car. And then I get back in, and they've obviously just cranked the music up because there's no way I'd listen to music that loud. The ear's adjusting. It's an amazing component to who we are. But unfortunately, that means we get used to stuff not working sometimes. And with the system using self-check, we can actually test to make sure it's working every day.
All right, again, ask any questions you want. We'll get to those here in a second. Guys, I want to kind of pull back a bit from the product itself and just talk overarching, kind of holistically here. When you're talking to either the folks that put your systems in, or you're talking to school administrators, you're talking to school safety officers, Michael, who should drive this conversation? Who should drive the kind of the project of a system like this? Is it IT? Is it the school safety officer? Is it all the way up to administration? Who all should drive this, and who should be involved?
Yeah, it's got to come from the security team first and
Okay.
foremost. IT has to be a very active part in that. There was a day that all these systems ran and through the facilities people. The traditional Bell and PA was kind of through facilities. That has shifted. And that is not a shot at facilities. They were always great people to work with, and they're still great. But the reality is we're taking what was a Bell and PA system and we're making it a communication system for all kinds of events. It's got to work on the IT infrastructure. And then it's got to be built to a security standard and not a convenience standard, because most of us, the average, me and Cameron, we don't study this stuff enough. We don't have the data enough. We don't know what we're going to do. But the reality is the response is going to be tied to what the local first responders are going to do and what they expect, as well as the configuration and structure of my school. So it has to be custom built for that facility or for that group of schools to make sure that we've got the right flow. An open concept school, as an example, where there's not as many walls, is going to have some different rules than a traditional high school. Go down the hallway and there's classes everywhere on both sides. So it's got to be driven locally by the security professionals.
Cameron, same question from your perspective. Who all should be involved in this?
Yeah, ultimately it's the people who are in charge of driving these safe outcomes, right? If something happens, who is responsible for making sure that the situation resolves and everyone can go home safe at the end of the day? Now, to Michael's point, the way we go about implementing that includes a mix of the IT professionals, of the facilities professionals, of anyone involved in operations. But the process starts with security in mind. A great feature that we always lean back on is saying you can have a security system or security functionality that also enables your day-to-day operations. These don't have to be two independent systems. You can have Bell and PA in the morning announcements or communication systems that also function in the event of an emergency. And then when you look beyond school security at, say, a manufacturing plant or a corporate environment that has shift employees, a shift clock is very similar to a bell schedule, right? And so when we're talking about more corporate world environments, that functionality still applies there. But to answer your original question of who's in charge, it's security. When an event happens, no one's going to point to the IT people and say, why didn't you have a security system in place?
Yeah.
Right? They're going to point to the security officials and say, why didn't you have a plan in place?
And we depend a lot on our integrator partners. I just want to be very clear. We they're partners for a reason for us. And we depend on them heavily to expose that there are options outside of what people at the school or what any facility may know even exist, right? So just creating awareness quite often is a really powerful thing, because people may not be aware that these solutions they're not walking the halls at ISC West, right? And so they're trying to focus on learning outcomes and all of that with their kids. So the more we can do to get them familiar with it, so that when they walk in, people tend to think education is like, oh, there's no money in it. And I don't mean to sound bad, but in the world of security, there's a lot of money in it. I would pay a lot to make sure my kids are safe. I think everybody else would too, right? And so when money is dedicated to that, there's not the backlash that there kind of always was. And so there's absolutely money there. And as facilities and IT and security all become a more integrated solution, the cost centralizes, and it's actually less than what it used to be.
Michael, you said something a minute ago about making sure that first responders, local police, and local fire are involved. How involved should they be in a system like this, where they understand, look, XYZ happens, then this is going to happen? How involved should they be in this process, and where in this process should they live?
Very. They're the experts. And so, look, the school, God bless them, the security officers at most of these schools, if they have one, it's one person, right? My kids went to a high school with 4,000 other kids. One of my sons sent a picture of high school his very first day, walking on a second story and looking down on a hallway, and it just looked like a massive humanity trying to drive. I don't even know how you get through that, right? So a single security officer in that kind of large environment is going to run to the problem, and they most of the time they're heroes, right? Most of the time they really do, and more often than not, you hear about them being the person that helps manage the situation. But ultimately, getting the local authorities and first responders on site, they need to know what the protocols are. They need to know where they're going to look for people. They need as much information and be trained as comfortably as possible. and they need real-time feedback from the systems and the people on site. 911's included in that, callers, um, so that they know how to best manage the situation. So most of them are familiar with floor plans, all that kind of stuff to kind of be ready to go. And they have to be, and they should be.
Cameron, you guys talked about creating awareness a minute ago. How exactly would one go about creating awareness? The reason I ask that is because there's to me there's a fine line between creating awareness and creating not hysteria, but creating concern, right? Help me find that line here, where you are, whether it's a concerned parent or simply a concerned citizen. How would somebody go about creating awareness that a system like this exists?
It's just a matter of saying, here's how we can detect and then communicate, right?
Okay.
If we go back to the function of the system and say, look, um, even if you lived under a rock, you would know that schools have been targets of violence,
Yeah.
right? So if we can now say, we all know this and we don't want that to happen. We want to have something in place that can protect us from that happening. Then by showing here are the different types of features and functions and systems that can give you early indication that something is happening or about to happen. And then here's the action that we can take to communicate to people to create that safe outcome. Ultimately, what we want to show is that safe outcome. So as opposed to saying or giving a message of awareness that has a sentiment of be on alert, be scared, be afraid because there's a threat that you might not see coming, we don't want to do that. We want to focus on driving the safe outcome and communicating how our system can lead to that ending. Um, we know there's risks in everyday life, right? Some are more severe than others. We know how to take an action driving a car, right? Walking down the street, we look both ways. So there's some preventive actions that we all take every day because we know there's some risks, some more severe than others. But by showing how do we get the end outcome that we all want to see, that's how we ultimately get awareness that people feel more comfortable with this sort of technology, even though the threat is something that no one is comfortable with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Michael,
I think today people would be uncomfortable if they don't have a system than if they do. I think there was a time where we didn't want to talk about it because it's scary.
yeah.
And I think now, to Cameron's point, you'd have to be living under a rock to not know that schools have been a target. So the question, I think more often than not, is what are we doing
Mm-hmm.
to make sure my kids are going to be safe while they're here?
It's been 27 years since Columbine, right? It was 1999. And we've been, not that there weren't school shootings before then, but that's the one that people point to as the start of this current modern issue. And so, yeah, I think you're right. Living under a rock is putting it mildly. Michael, we started off this conversation talking about schools, and we didn't say it out loud, but the implication was K-12, because that is generally when we talk about school shootings, that is certainly where a lot of people's brains go. That's where mine goes. School shootings, though, have happened on college campuses, and there have been mass shootings at offices. There have been mass shootings at manufacturing facilities. When you guys look at this solution, you start talking to folks, where else besides K-12 do you guys see a system like this going?
Everything that you just said.
Okay.
And let's start with higher ed.
Yeah.
So the last three shootings in a higher ed facility have been Michigan State, UNLV, and Florida State.
Yeah.
All three of those were outside of buildings, right? The data is pretty clear. There's some trends and some activity, but it doesn't take long to get back to Virginia Tech, and that was indoors, right? So there is a massive need on college campuses for communication systems. And I think the amount of outdoor area in particular is highly exposed on most campuses with very little coverage. That is proactive, at least. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. We've been doing industrial for several years, and as a country, we've been on this, let's try to bring more manufacturing and jobs back to the United States. And that means manufacturing and warehousing increases, right? But so do the number of incidents. And it's not just violence. I mean, we're talking medical issues too, right? You have a single worker working in the back of a warehouse, and all of a sudden he's got pain in his chest and he doesn't feel like he can go, he needs the ability to call for help. He needs a way, a means, right? When we talked about IntelliSea having the person on the ground, that person could just faint, right? Or fall on a wet area that is a fall risk, right? And so, but so factories and manufacturing for sure, and warehousing, we have a huge factory, as you know, in Ennis, Texas,
Yep.
and we use the system throughout our facility because anybody could walk in, and I could give you multiple examples, but the most powerful conversation I had was with a factory owner who had 3 factories down in the deep south, and an employee that came in and shot his boss, and that was it. And the boss lived, and the person that did it got arrested, and so everybody can feel better about the end of the story. But what scared the owner was that no one in the building heard the shot
Mm.
because they're all wearing safety protection because of the loud manufacturing.
Yeah.
So he said, I've got to have visual and audio stuff that's loud enough these people can hear, right? Because if somebody wants to come in and get body count, we've got real issues in our hands. And it happens, unfortunately. It's terrible to say it that way, but it happens. And corporate workplace violence is massively on the rise. And then the last thing I'll say is healthcare. I mean, if you go do a little bit of research on the assault rate on nurses right now, it's the wrong direction. And it's been that way since COVID, and unfortunately it's gotten worse over time. And so there's a lot of need for people to have systems that allow for detection of issues and communication so they can get the help that they need. That's our job as a manufacturer, is to try to stop as many of those things as quickly as we can.
Cameron, when you look at, take me through this process for a second here. It is from the time somebody's like, I am aware that this system exists. I think it's fantastic, or I think it's something that we want to do. What does it look like from that point to turning it on, some fall before school starts?
Yeah, so Michael mentioned earlier how closely we work with our integration partners. They will generally design out that system. We'll work with a team of A&Es and consultants to make sure that the system is accomplishing the procedures, the outcomes that the end user wants. It fits to what they want. And we also have a design services team at Atlas IED. When I look at the security industry, we have a lot of folks that have been doing video systems for 30 years. They've been doing access control systems for decades. Any kind of audio, mass notification, mass communication system might be something they're less familiar with. So we want to bring our 90 plus years of expertise in audio and in communications to their aid. And so our design services team will take a look at their project, at the building plans. They'll help lay out the technology that's needed where. They'll provide a bill of materials so the integrator or the installer knows exactly what they need to use. We want to guide them through the process to whatever degree of assistance that's required to make sure that they can implement a system and a platform that works for their end user. There's no one style that we do consistently across each project. Some of our partners call up and say, hey, I've got a project with this school or this university or this healthcare facility. And we say, great, how can we help? And they say, we're good, just making sure you got the units in stock. And other times they say, I got a customer that asked me how to do this. I haven't done it before. What do I need? And we'll walk them through the process. So there's not a one size fits all approach to making sure someone goes from interested to installed. But we want to make sure, regardless of their level of familiarity with the technology or the systems, that we can go back and make sure the system works flawlessly once it's put into place.
Michael, you mentioned that this is a modular system. Part of that modularness is the ability to take these different modules, right, the different detectors into the IPX system. But walk me through the deployment part. How easy is it to say, you know what, I have 10 zones, I have 10 areas, I have 10 regions. We can afford to do 3, but next year we can do 3 more.
Sure.
Is it an all or nothing thing, or can I do this in steps?
Yeah, steps, fine. We have a lot of entry points for people. Back to what we were talking earlier. All right, I already have this infrastructure in place. It's all analog. I want to move to IP. This is my real area of concern, but I'd like to put these common spaces, right? Hallways, cafeterias, things like that, into into an IP um, system without changing everything out. We can take our gateways and move them to that into that model, use their existing infrastructure, but make it IP from a management standpoint. And that can be, we have some schools and some customers, period, that it's a 2-3 year implementation model. And we have others that they find out about it and there's a PO 6 weeks later, right? And that's the rarity, right? The majority of them, generally by the end of the fall, we've got a pretty good idea what next summer looks like,
Okay.
right? But like I got a request today for pricing for a job for 2029. Um,
Wow.
somebody's really ahead. And so if they're on top of their construction schedule and have all those things in place, then um, or have funding coming that they know of, whatever the case is, or have it secured. And all of that impacts the speed at which this evolution happens. But there's absolutely, we work with little bitty small town schools where K-12 is a single building. Like I grew up in West Texas, and the people that are in FAA have to leave their boots outside the school because they're out working in their fields that morning or they're taking care of their animals. I'm not kidding. And you see a bunch of kids walking around in socks in the school. And we work in those schools, and we just did all of Detroit public schools. So any mix and anything in between, we have solutions that allow them to fit their budget to make sure that we can move them this direction.
And if you did not grow up in an agricultural environment, FFA is Future Farmers of America.
Yes, they are.
Just to spell that out, because
You'll know them by their blue jackets. They're great people. Yeah,
great,
yeah,
fantastic people, some of my best friends. So,
yeah. But if you're out working in the fields,
yes, you do not want,
your boots might smell.
they will smell. There is no might about it. All right, we do have a couple of questions before we let you guys get out of here. The first one is, if a security team thinks that they've got a PA system, they've got mass notification, they have the ability to put out announcements, and they think that that is okay, they think that is enough security, what would you say to them?
Yeah. So I would start, and this is my favorite Jesus thing. Jesus will go in as a consultant for schools, and he'll have the principal walk him around the building, right? Just simply walk. And somewhere in a hallway, he'll go, okay, lock it down. And the principal will go, I got to get to a phone, or I got to get to the front office, or I got to. And he's like, so you're going to just sit in the office the entire time? And like, if the system isn't truly modular, if they can't truly execute it and start it from anywhere, if they can't, most of those old school systems are not going to work for anything unless somebody's there to flip the switch,
Yeah.
right? And most of the time, you're not there, right? No one's there. At best, you have an administrative assistant who might be in that room. But that's the concern, is problems are going to creep up, pop up from everywhere. And you don't have time to press more than one button. In fact, candidly, if you're really smart, you don't press any buttons. It's automated, so it actually fully happens. But if you have to flip a button, the question is, who's going to do that under pressure with active shooting going on, right? And then the question is, if you got to press multiple buttons, who's going to actually get through that series? And most of the time, the answer is, this is antiquated and old, and it doesn't work anymore. For the world has changed, and if you see the world's changed outside the building, it also has to change inside. So that simple example of launch it while you're walking down the hallway, most of the time that's the end of the conversation. They immediately know that they aren't where they need to be. If you have to be in a spot to make your system activate, your system is antiquated.
Tim, the other part of that is, how are you detecting something to communicate over that loudspeaker system?
Yeah, exactly.
So when we ask that question, it's less about the technology being used, and it's more about the process and procedure that the facility is following using the technology. So speakers are great, PA systems are great, they serve a purpose and they can be used. But ultimately, if you don't have a process to detect and then communicate, doesn't matter if you have our system or someone else's, you need to be able to follow that process. So To Michael's point, who's going to activate that system if it's not automated? Where do they need to be? Can they be anywhere? Making sure you have that process in place is ultimately more important than the given technology you have in the building.
So Paul asked this, Paul wrote a statement in, but I'm going to ask the question here. What if they're not open to a discovery discussion?
That's a tough one, right? It's hard
It
to
is.
sell to a customer that doesn't think they have a problem,
Yeah.
right? And it's hard to educate a customer. So I think the only thing you can do is try to make them aware that there's alternatives to potentially what they have, and then B, to make sure they understand the consequences of not doing anything without just being a jerk about how you say it. But the reality is the people that you see walking in front of the cameras with, a notebook in front of their face, that's not the people that prepared and planned ahead. And even those people that did everything right are often still at the face of public skewering, right? Because of the results, right? So it's scary to me to think that there would still be someone in school administration that didn't think this was a concern that had to be addressed.
At the very least, have a discussion about emergency preparedness in general.
Yeah.
The fire drills, they're doing something about fire drills today. If you're on the West Coast, I grew up in California, we had earthquake drills every day. Not every day, every year, excuse me. But to make sure you had some kind of emergency preparedness plan in place. And like we said at the outset, the nature of the threat that schools are facing today has changed over the years. So how has your emergency preparedness plan changed over the years?
I'm going to bring up something here, and I don't care how old it makes me sound. Because Cameron just brought up something here. When I went to school in the 80s, we freaking had nuclear bomb attack drills. Okay, now it's been a minute since we've had that kind of level of concern. But I would equate this to that, right? It is something where it has emerged. It's not emerging. It's not actively doing it. It has emerged as a concern, and so school administrators should certainly take it as serious as that. Couple more questions here. Victoria's got a couple questions. The first one is, would the gunshot detection modules be able to integrate a custom impulse response profile for a campus? In other words, can you customize that reply or that message?
In terms of what happens after a detection, yes. Yes.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all. So we partner heavily with a software company called SingleWire.
Yep.
We resell it on our price sheet, and essentially, you go define every scenario, and you define exactly what you want to have happen when an event happens, so that those are all predetermined. Again, we don't want someone having to make a decision when they're trying to protect themselves or protect their students. We want them to, it's got to be more instinctive in that moment. The system has to be able to make the decisions because you already decided what was going to happen.
And that's beyond just making announcements or sending out visual displays.
Yeah.
You can create an emergency Teams channel between first responders, facility managers, security professionals, so that everyone has one place to go for instant communication to everybody else. There are a number of different tools that can be activated upon a detection and an emergency. So it goes back to process, right? You have all these tools at your disposal. How are you using them so that when a emergency is detected, what's the next step? What's the next procedure to drive that safe outcome?
And it's got to always be customized to the building and to the type of students.
All right. Actually, Victoria has another one here, and does the gunshot database include outdoor or campus profiles?
Not today. Today it's trained on indoor models that was designed in K-12 environments.
All right. Guys,
I would look for expansion on that. I mean, just over time. What we introduced and what you saw last week, Tim, was 20% of what this platform is designed to be. So I think you'll see significant evolution. As I said a lot last week, we have more memory than we need. We have more processing than we need because we don't know what we need. We have a roadmap mapped out for the next 2.5 to 3 years worth of evolution on the platform. But even at that point, the accessories, they'll be adjusted to the problems in the world or the risks that we have at that time. That's the whole point of making it modular is if I sell it into an industrial environment and I sell the exact same model in an education environment, they can have very different capabilities and all over a single drop because I'm just running a different, demands. I really need more environmental management in the factory, maybe, than I need in the education environment, as an example.
It also goes back to your first level data collection as well, right?
That's right.
Because you guys can collect that data, you can augment that data set. Before I let you guys get out of here, I'm going to hit one more. Friends, I will just read this. I'll let that happen, and we'll take care of that after the fact. Michael, I'll hit you first on this, and then Cameron will ask you the same question. A year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, what does success of this product look like to you in this system?
Yeah, so for me, first and foremost, one of the reasons that we have, and Cameron mentioned fire drills. One of the reasons that we've had the success with fire management is that we have standards in place.
Okay.
So we are part of the Moss Group. That is Lori Aldahoff. You would know Lori as Alyssa's mom, and if you know of Alyssa's Law, this is an incredible woman who has made the decision to relive the absolute worst day of her life over and over every single day to make sure that other parents don't have to. And she is a legislative powerhouse. She is converting states, but there is an effort at the federal level, right? And there's multiple groups, SIA, which put on the show last week, they've got active efforts as well. What I would really hope that we see in that 5-year time frame, and hopefully sooner than that, is that we actually put a federal standard in place for our public education facilities and make sure that we have the means to be able to make sure that's in place and audited and safe. There's a lot of variations of a solution, and some are good and some are not. And so it would be nice if we actually had some kind of standard out there that people had to adhere to. And then the other big difference is, look, our goal is to save lives, plain and simple. When an event happens, and they will, we want to know that the system played its role, but that also counts on the security team playing their role, the staff preparing the kids the right way, the kids doing the right thing when the event happened. There's so many factors that go in, but we want to know that we played a role in making a difference. It's been a passion of myself. It's been a passion of John Ivey, the owner of the company, who had a shooting in his son's school. That from the time I interviewed here 8 years ago, our goal was to figure out how we save lives. That is an absolute calling for both of us and for the whole company today.
All right. Cameron, same question.
Yeah, ultimately, we want to make sure that when someone gets up in the morning, they go to school, they go to work, and God forbid some emergency happens, that at the end of that day, they come right back home.
Okay.
Pure and simple, that's how it works. So we want to be sure to enable that. We can see things as they're happening. We can detect a risk immediately and have that instantaneous communication to let people know what to do so they can go home at the end of the day. That's it.
All right, gentlemen. Michael, if somebody wants to find out more about this system or Atlas IED in general, how do they do that?
Yeah, so the website is www.atlasIED.com. There is a new web address. I don't believe it is live yet. I think it's redirecting back to the main site, but it will be coming, and that will be atlasipx.com, www.atlasipx.com. So we'll continue to put a lot of information out there. Plus, it's really easy to find us on LinkedIn. We do a lot of activity on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook and others as well, but probably the most substantive amount of information, videos, interviews, things like that are posted on LinkedIn.
All right, very good. Cameron Jamdani, Michael Peebler from Atlas ID, thank you both so much. If we did not get to your question, we will, we've got your email address. We will reach out to you and connect you with the right people there. For Emily, as well as everybody at rAVe, and for us here at Aviation, thanks so much for joining us for this Launch and Learn.